Welcome to the Biz Apps Classroom, a new podcast collaboration between msdynamicsworld.com and 365.training, all about learning and training in the Microsoft Business Applications ecosystem. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com, and I am joined by my co-host for this project, Julie Yack. She's the Microsoft MVP and trainer, and also one of the founders of the curated online training site 365 Training. Hi, Julie.
Hey, Jason. How's it going?
It's going well. I am excited to kick off this new podcast project, as I called it. I think project's a good term for it. And this is, for our listeners, this is episode 1.
And I've been a guest on 5 million different podcasts. This is kind of the first one where it's mine and yours. So it's a new project for me.
Yeah, it's great to have something really focused. I think as we chatted about this and it came to life here, I think we both thought it would be fun to really bring training into focus, not just for one conversation, but to really go deeper on it. And that's what we plan to do sort of over time here with episodes that we already have planned, and probably a lot that we will be coming up with as time goes on and as topics evolve and the products evolve and all that good stuff.
Right. It's constantly moving. And it seems that everybody has their preferred training sites. Everyone has their preferred free content, maybe apprehensive about paying for content. And how do you make sense of all that and get your own path?
Absolutely. Training is one of those topics that it's never going out of style. It's always something that especially customers need to think about. Partners certainly think a lot about it as well. And people who do training professionally like you do. And just one note for the listeners also, 365 Training as a sort of partner in this project does have their own training, right? And we'll be talking more at the end about some information on a special offer for listeners to this podcast related to 365 Training. And maybe this would be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about what your business is and sort of maybe how it evolved to this point.
Well, 365.training focuses primarily on Power Platform with the cited dynamics. That is where we came from, is from the dynamic CRM world. And it is some on-demand content, but also we have some little things on the side as well. We do virtual trainings. We can do in-person trainings. We have our news digest feed and so many other offerings there. Some of it's free, some of it's paid. We are in business to make money like everybody else. But we also really know how important it is for our entire professional community to be properly trained and on a path forward.
One of the things that is interesting, I think, about this particular offering is sort of what it says about how training's evolved in the Dynamics ecosystem. And you're certainly someone who has a perspective on that because you've been doing training for a long time and in a lot of different contexts, right?
Yes. So it started off 5 million years ago. We helped make some hands-on labs that were actually in one of the first SDKs that we had for CRM. So we did some hands-on activities to help with getting to understand how to use the platform as a developer before the platform was known for being developer-friendly. And so we kind of helped push that forward and have evolved to helping different large organizations make their own new hire boot camps and one-off projects here and there, helping with some official Microsoft curriculum, unofficial Microsoft curriculum, and doing our own thing as well.
Well, should we talk a little bit about what listeners can expect from this series as we really get it ramped up beyond today?
I think so, yes. But also, I want to make sure that we don't get ourselves so defined into our list that we don't take into consideration somebody else's list. So that if anyone is listening has a topic they'd like us to cover, they have a guest that they'd like us to have, they want to be a guest on the show, we want to ebb and flow and be as agile in this as possible so that you get the best benefits.
Yeah, that's a good point. Should we maybe share contact information at this point in case anyone does have thoughts or comments or questions for us?
Absolutely. I'm pretty easy to find. I'm Julie at 365.training.
All right. I'm Well, by email, I'm jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. You can also look me up on LinkedIn, I suppose.
Yep, same here. Jason, you need an alias. You need something that's easier than J Gumpert. You should be Jason at
Okay.
msdynamicsworld.com.
All right.
I can show you
I'll
how to
put
do
that
that.
on my to-do list.
I can teach you how to do that, Jason.
That's true. I could get some M365 administrator training or something like that.
Exactly. That's easy enough.
Oh, all right. All right. Well, I think, in coming up with topics for what we do plan to talk about going forward here, I mean, I have a very different perspective than you, which I think is one of the things that'll make this series interesting. I'm always looking at sort of what the latest releases are, what the latest features are, and sort of how companies are using those, or how they will start to use them as they begin to roll out, like with release waves and preview features that then become, generally available. But I think for trainers, it's not necessarily always about just looking at the very latest. It's much more holistic, I imagine, in addition to knowing what's new and what's coming up, right?
Absolutely. Take, for example, model-driven applications in Power Apps and Dynamics. I have a How to Use Model-Driven Apps course. It's free on our site. And every 6 months or so, I go through it to make sure that it's still current. And a few years in, and it's still current. There's minor things here and there I might change if I were starting over again. But for the most part, using a model-driven app is the same as it was several years ago, with little things here and there that change. So the fundamentals are super important, and they stay with you.
Yeah, like for example, I think with the newest release wave, there's some updates to the way model-driven apps look, right? The look and feel is being updated.
Yes. But again, sometimes the look and feel, though it's being updated, still feels a whole lot the same. That's one of the nice things about the model-driven apps is they're reliable. They're easy to quickly implement, and they're comfortable, right? So there's the whole look and feel of a Microsoft app, much like you get in an Office app. And those model-driven apps feel the same way. So users' anxiety gets reduced pretty quickly because they feel that they know how to do the basics.
Mm-hmm. And, I just imagine that, as a trainer, you're meeting people where they're at and trying to, educate them. So you probably are used to hearing from, brand new Dynamics or Power Platform customers. It's just been implemented, or maybe they've just joined the company and need to get trained up. And then there's also very advanced people. So I imagine we'll be running the gamut of some of those different topics as well.
I would think so. One of the things that we see is that people who are brand new, who are starting a new career, maybe they were doing something different last week, and this week they decided they want to try tech and have realized how accessible Power Platform can be. New people don't want to pay for training because there's so many free options available. And while I agree that there are some really good free options available, sometimes you need that curated path, and sometimes that costs money. And that's kind of a tough sell for someone who's new, who hasn't started making money yet.
Yeah. And that applies to so many different kinds of education and learning. I just had a personal experience with that where I've been trying to learn a language, and I finally went and decided to pay for a class, and I realized like sort of how much more sort of basic my actual understanding was without sort of formal training, just learning on my own and sort of resetting my expectations in the context of trained professional educators versus sort of self-training. And I imagine some of that is very much the same when you're learning a product like a Power Platform or D365 app.
Absolutely. And I'm the first to admit that I often will go find those free resources first to kind of get a flavor of what's going on before I decide that there needs to be more.
Mm-hmm. And certifications are a big part of that for some people, right?
I have very mixed feelings about certifications,
Okay.
but yes.
Worth discussing. And I know they are important in certain contexts, right? Whether you love them or hate them.
Absolutely. I wish that there were a better way to gauge someone's skills and qualifications, But if all I know about you are your certifications, then there's more value to them than if you have experience.
Yeah, and you even pointed me to something you wrote, I mean, over a decade ago about your feelings about certifications. It's certainly not a new topic, one that's been around forever.
I think I pointed to a blog post that I wrote about failing a certification exam.
Yeah, maybe we'll get into that more as we do touch on the certification topic more in future episodes. We had quite a few ideas, obviously, of sort of where we're going to go from here. Are there other like particular themes that you want to just point out to our listeners now out of sort of the longer list that we have?
Well, I think some important things to talk about include things like the differences between virtual training and in-person training. We're all starting to come back out in person and get out of our four walls of our offices and do more. I traveled last week. I'm traveling next week. It kind of feels like old times again.
And those are so in-person training. So that's getting in front of a room full of learners and taking them through lessons and educating them in person.
Yes, and a lot of that would include the hands-on labs and actually getting the ability to click through it and do things and try it out and start to work on that muscle memory of how it feels to build a cloud flow, how it feels to make that form on a Canvas app.
Yeah, and I imagine as someone who's been through plenty of those types of labs in the past, I mean, the questions that you come up with in the moment are not things you would necessarily get while watching a video, right?
Correct. And also in that moment in a live in-person classroom, I can kind of look at you and see if you've got your head tilted sideways and you're confused, right? Versus in a virtual training, we're not going to all have our cameras on all day. Nobody wants to have their cameras on all day. And so it's hard for me to gauge your, I guess, how well you're understanding the topics and how well you're proceeding on the labs without being very intrusive. Whereas in a classroom, I can visually look at you. I can walk around the back of the room and kind of look at your screen without hovering too closely and see if you're catching up with everybody else and things like that. It's just a much different feeling, a much different set of benefits to that in-person training.
Mm-hmm. And I kind of misspoke a minute ago. I said video-based, but I mean, really the distinction that you make is virtual versus in-person and then sort of live versus on-demand. Those are sort of two different sort of dimensions to compare.
Yes.
Both are probably worth getting into.
Well, they all have benefits and they all have downfalls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. They probably all have a certain place and they can all serve a purpose if they're used appropriately, right?
Right. And we casually touched on certifications, but in addition to that certification conversation, it goes hand in hand with the role-based training conversation because that's where certifications are headed, is what certifications do you need for what job role you're targeting or what job role you have now.
What else? I mean, there's different types of audiences, right? Like different types of learners, I guess you would say, that we might dive into.
Well, because you and I are digital immigrants. I'm a little bit older than you, but you were not born with a smartphone in your hand.
That is true.
Neither was I. We had, in middle school, we had every semester 1 week in a computer lab, and it was a green screen computer lab. It was hardcore old school. And so the way that you approach training someone who's a digital immigrant versus a digital native is a little bit different.
Okay, interesting. Yep. I have some digital natives in my house, and I'll kind of compare and contrast how I think they might do. They're not quite old enough to join the workforce yet, but maybe I can extrapolate a bit from what I've seen from them.
Well, and there are some fairly reasonable trainings out there for kids getting started with Power Platform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a whole area that I've been thinking about more recently. I think maybe as the last few years have gone on, I've just chatted with people whose children are basically aging into the workforce, whose parents are already sort of in the Microsoft space, who have different kinds of roles in the partner channel or whatever. I see more of them sort of encouraging their kids to look at this industry or this ecosystem as well, because it is It's a pretty interesting place to start a career, and depending on what your skills are and what your interests are, and maybe there's some tie-in on that to this whole series. Just an idea
Yeah,
for the future.
definitely. And my kids are past that age. My son is in software. He's got some great things going with his company in Europe. And my daughter is a registered nurse, so she's probably not going to be our target audience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
All right.
the kids definitely are. They're ripe for pointing them toward a path. And with Power Platform, it kind of gives them some ideas, but doesn't box them into a defined career.
And the last sort of theme that I think I had on my list here was AI and learning, and that also leads into maybe where I wanted to take the conversation next. Where do you see us talking about AI and learning?
Oh, so many things. One of the great things about Copilot is it helps point you in the right direction. One of the awful things about Copilot is it points you sometimes in the wrong direction. And you need to be knowledgeable enough in what you're doing to recognize when that's happening. But using AI and training, um, we've got that on our site in a couple different places. So we've got our training Copilot, which exists within a course that allows you, in the context of a course, to ask a targeted Copilot questions about that topic. So try as we might, there's no way we can include everything about Power Automate in a Power Automate course. So you're in the middle of a beginner or mid-level Power Automate course and you have a question that's not covered, you can go directly to what we call 365 AI and ask it a question in the context of the course. And it will answer the question about Power Automate and maybe some peripheral technologies, but not get distracted and you can't take the conversation outside of Power Platform. So it will redirect you back into Power Platform. And so I see that happening. I would imagine, and I would hope, honestly, that more and more places give you that opportunity to infuse AI in your learning experiences. Even our competitors should be doing things like that. And then we've also got AI where we are curating your news feed. So I mentioned our My Digest earlier, and what we've done is we've curated a bunch of sources. I think when I looked yesterday, it was 160 something different sources of information about all things Power Platform and Dynamics. So it's training content, YouTube channels, news feeds, blogs, official blogs, unofficial blogs, training, podcasts, all those different things. But you set up your own preferences. And so I see that only expanding where you can curate your own training based on your preferences as well. And so hopefully we'll continue to get more and more AI infused in our our everyday life. But all we hear about these days is how big AI is. But I think strategically, small AI has more impact on our everyday.
Very interesting. Yeah. And that really ties in some very interesting ways to what Microsoft has been putting out there into the world in the last, even the last couple weeks as, Ignite 2023 came and went, and sort of the latest demos and the latest features surrounding business applications got a little bit more visibility. If you looked at some of the slides from that event from Microsoft, Copilot was everything essentially. Not everything. You could drill down and see more than that, but that's what they're leading with, and some of that does sort of look like not training, but at least guidance. I would say like product guidance even gets into that AI space for them. But I think, like you said, it's not a substitute for training. It's not training. It's probably more, help or guidance, I guess you would call it, in the context of user experience.
Right. It removes friction and kind of helps you along your way. It's a co-pilot. It's not autopilot. It's not the pilot. It is a co-pilot. It's designed to be your first officer if we're looking for our aviation references, right? It's not the captain.
Mm-hmm.
And we did several hands-on labs last week at Ignite. And I participated in 3 different ones, and all of them had a Copilot element. There was a lab for sales. So all of the students came into a sales environment, so a Dynamics 365 sales environment that was pre-populated with data and so on. And they walked through how to complete the sales process, the standard lead to opportunity, which effectively has been the same for 10 years or more. But then we add AI to it. We add the Copilot for the user. So the user can then interact with the data using Copilot. So you can ask the Copilot to do some first level analytics for you. It can show me all of my contacts who have not had a paid transaction in 6 months, for example. And you can get that type of interaction with your Copilot in sales. And then there was a lab for building a Canvas app using Copilot. And so you talk to the Copilot, you explain the data model you need, you have some back and forth and agree on the data model, and then it automatically builds that first level Canvas app for you and moves things around, and then add a Copilot to the user. So again, they can have that interaction with the data. And then the final lab that we did was Copilot in Power Automate, where the Copilot in Power Automate is not as mature as some of the others. Azure McFarland led that hands-on lab, and she's the first to admit that it really needs some very specific prompts and guidance to give you what you need. And that's a great example of why it's important to understand the underlying product before you rely on the Copilot.
Right. Because if you don't have that baseline understanding of, or fundamental, I guess, understanding, it's going to be maybe even more confusing.
Right. And we're going to build a whole generation of app makers and automation specialists who don't know when to interfere and fix whatever that Copilot has given you.
Yeah, that's one of the sort of long-term, I guess, debates in my mind with Power Platform in general. It's like, do they want it to be? How long can it continue to be both for advanced skilled developers and for citizen developers? I think it's still, if you ask Microsoft, it's still both, but you'll hear different things in different contexts from them too. So that is and sort of the AI based generative capabilities in Power Platform do make me wonder sort of who it's for long term.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, there has always been and there will always be a market for people to specialize in rescue projects, and Copilot does not change that.
Right. Yep. Perhaps it sends that industry in new directions, or that specialty, I guess you'd say, in new directions.
Yeah. It's different troubleshooting. You're trying to find different problems.
Yeah. Right. I am curious about Ignite, because I attended online, as I think the vast majority of people did. What was it like in person?
It was almost like it used to be. So still a lot of folks everywhere. The keynotes were busy and full and had super long lines to get in. So, for example, the first keynote, Satya's keynote, when we arrived an hour before it was supposed to start, there was a line wrapped all the way around the second floor, a line wrapped all the way around the third floor, and halfway around the fourth floor just to get into the room an hour before it started.
Wow. That sounds worse than the pre-COVID days.
Yes. Well, and I think pre-COVID, they just had the doors open and you just came in and sat down when you wanted.
Right. Maybe you had security getting into the conference center, but then once you were in, it was pretty easy to get to a seat.
Right. Absolutely. And so that's a little bit different. The sessions were either really packed or really empty. We didn't see a whole lot of in between. The hands-on labs were almost all full. So that was good to see. Conference food is still conference food. They did pretty good with the snacks. There were cupcakes and there was produce. So they checked off all those boxes.
All right. Well, yeah, I mean, there certainly is more to discuss there, but maybe we should start to wrap up for today. I think this was a good first episode of the project here.
I think so. I think our Biz Apps Classroom can find a home here.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone for listening. Please do stay tuned. We will have a lot more episodes planned, a lot to discuss. Like you said, Julie, hopefully some fun guests joining us here and there as we go.
That sounds great. Make sure that you check the show notes here. We'll have a link for our special offer for our listeners. It'll be a 365 link /MSDW for MS Dynamics World guests. And that'll get you a discount on our annual subscriptions at 365.training.
And as we already mentioned, you can reach out to us with any ideas, thoughts, opinions. I'm Jay Gumpert at msdynamicsworld.com. Julie, you are?
Julie at 365.training.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. We'll see you next time.